we yam komotwetwe enye interview se wani je ho a omoden se obehye amaomia bi enye bi ahwe se wenye de wani je ho na metufo se obegya ahwe na ye de wani je ho ni bi ba watumi ahwe fa comment bra yenkin kan ni na emfama Mariam fi se komo ebetwetwe enyumakui eni kura yasen
True grateful so there. Start to send me anymore. O council sima na ben.
Tap na Sunday. No e-levy wahala.
With Diaspora Insurance, your peace of mind is guaranteed.
Rapid Courier, just shop, we deliver. Enjoy.
Oops, original.
Malata African market mu King Kong.
Every day is a Black Friday. Yeah!
Alright, Abusian for Sabre Bemo Aquaba Babia Obia. We a live coverage of my Ghana economy, you know. Kwaba Edo Aba UPSA Osha Womo Auditorium Kesiapa University of Professional Studies Accra NDC and Penning for said the Uhunu Woman members of Parliament P Ewaha Sansona former ministers P and so Ewaha Osha Donwa Akasimano Mienu Simamienu na nonson abo nonson ebo ya na chase say the former president John Dramani Mahama ebeba inside her na as to say on a beshasi and also be beshasi and yentumi enchre ni nyina no said ye o man Ghana yensikasem aye nim se kwasieda o mampani na nado danko akufuado ameka say one na soafo ewo nhyiamu kase bi mu a wo kwan a wo betumi afa so atoto niema na kwasieda no wa ba address nation no no announcement no eba ene before then na announcement in so ewo ho say John Dramani Mahama ene obekasa ede afa o my Ghana economy no eho enti consider the announcement de bebrem live me hunu Elvis free ankra me hunu former ministers ne pi wo mu nyina atena se a ye hwe ni mu say o mampani dada John Dramani Mahama be remu any moment akasima baako Muntaka Mubarak and Hunu say many Abraham Hunu woman along the line so ye ne ebi ebedi nkomo but answer no no more chacha no okay, very soon omampani dada ebe remu na fe ode ne nsemu a owo efa economy ho no ede aba okay abra o ma sorry that you say Omampani dada John Dramani Mahama and Sabre Ebrason say Obewura auditorium ha. All right, and Safin wa joining. Okay, then Omampani dada John Dramani Mahama and who say Sabre and Lodina Mahama and who say Oko Wajeni.
That you will endow him
with wisdom, knowledge, and understanding, that he will deliver to soothe the misery of your people. Tonight, O Lord, we pray that may your angels take charge over this auditorium. We come against every work of darkness in the mighty name of Jesus. And we pray, O Lord, that by your power, by your grace, by your mercy, may you redeem this country in Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Thank you very much, the Honorable Member of Parliament for the Medina constituency. Thank you. We are very grateful. And then you have put us in the spirit. If you're watching us on TV or listening to us on radio, we are live on various radio and TV stations across the country. We are live on Metro TV, Original TV, Original FM, Joy FM, Power FM, Radio XYZ, Class FM, Accra FM, CTV, TV XYZ, Wazo TV, and your favorite Loud Silence TV. You can also follow the conversation online with hashtag John Mahama Live or hashtag JM Speaks on the Economy. There's another hashtag also that says Save Ghana Now. So all these networks are available. You can tune in now. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, to pave the way for His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, let's welcome the Member of Parliament for Ejumako Enyaneshim and Minority Spokesperson for the Finance Committee, Dr. Ato Forson. Thank you very much.
We Jumedi fa Omagana in Sikasem ho enkontepu and Oman Dada John Dramani Mahama Ebekasa Ede Afaho.
Good evening. We are all going through the worst form of economic crisis in our lifetime. My duty today or this evening is to show how we got here, where we are going, obviously what occasioned the reason why we are where we are, and the consequences of the economic crisis we are going through. To start with, I have titled my presentation today, Get Ready for a Crude and Painful Haircut, the Consequences of Economic Mismanagement. Colleagues, we are all aware that the Akufo-Addo-Bawumia government inherited total public debt of about 120 billion Ghana cedis, representing approximately 55.6% of GDP. Indeed, we've also heard the World Bank in their latest project had accumulated 80% of today's public debt, indicating that they are the largest in terms of the accumulation of public debt since Kwame Nkrumah. This government has successfully driven our dear country into the ditch by making our debt highly unsustainable to a point of no return. Ghana has been made poorer under this administration. Cocoa Board has accumulated over 14 billion Ghana cedis in fresh debt. ECG owes IPPs, independent power producers, over 12 that contractors are owed international capital market and the domestic market. Today, if Ghana is supposed to go to the bond market, international bond market, we will end up borrowing dollar at 36%. Today, if you go to the domestic market, government structures have downgraded Ghana's credit worthiness to an unprecedented manner, in a level that has never happened in the history of Ghana. Fitch had to downgrade Ghana again from B- to CCC+ with an outlook, clearly meaning that they are going to downgrade us even further. Moody's also had to downgrade Ghana from B-, B3 to CAA2, with outlook also under review, clearly indicating that in the coming months, if things does not improve, they will downgrade us even further. Our unsustainable debt levels have led credit rating agencies to describe our dear country, Ghana, as a country where debt default is imminent with very little prospect for recovery. Unfortunately, these rating agencies are likely to downgrade our dear country, Ghana, further to D in the coming months because of our obvious pending debt restructuring. But let me say that it is true that the public debt is the main problem. Excessive borrowing leading to public overhang and the loss of access to the international capital market is the elephant in the room. Ghana's public debt overhang has reached an unprecedented level and is trending upwards. Even though the public debt levels have risen across some countries, the capacity to live with such debt levels varies considerably from country to country. The ability to repay the debt is certainly not the same. So it is wrong for people to compare the fact that some countries has debt to GDP in excess of 100%. The important point is that the ability to carry the debt differs from country to country. The load I can carry is certainly different from the load that my son can carry. So you cannot make that kind of analysis. It is sad to know that the Akufo-Addo government refused to accept that Ghana's economic woes are deeply rooted in the accumulation of the public debt to an unsustainable levels. The following analysis confirms that the unsustainable debt levels is indeed the problem. Let me say that Ghana's total domestic debt as at December 2020 had increased to 278% of domestic revenue, almost 3 times the size of domestic revenue, and is expected to worsen by the end of the year 2022, this year. This situation is far worse than the HIPC days. In fact, HIPC numbers looks better than today's numbers. It is also surprising to note that nearly 50% of the entire domestic revenue, including market tolls, the fees and charges at the OPD, all of them put together, goes towards debt servicing. This crowds out critical expenditure in the year 2020. And I will also project that by the end of this year, we will end up needing 55% of the entire domestic revenue to deliver the needed debt servicing that we require. But it is also important to understand that domestic revenue is different from tax revenue. Domestic revenue is far larger, and the amount of domestic revenue that is not available to individual for the central government. And so there is the need to consider the revenues that is available for central government. So oftentimes in my analysis, I use tax revenue. Interest payment as a percentage to tax revenue increased from 55% at the end of the year 2022. And it will surprise you to know that by the end of the year 2022, this year, interest payment will be approximately 55% of tax revenue. I've also got the opportunity to look at what actually occasioned Ghana has reached a point where about 90% of our tax revenue is used to service debt, making it virtually impossible to pay for statutory funds from the same tax revenue. I've often talked about the need for us to understand what has happened over the years and to understand that that is the main reason why where we are. For example, in the year 2018, 11.6 billion Ghana cedis, 7.1% of GDP. So they hid from Parliament an amount of 10 billion Ghana cedis. And the Ghanaian people did not know that they borrowed in excess of what it was. They actually borrowed 25.2 billion Ghana cedis. Clearly, they hid from the Ghanaian people approximately 8.2 billion Ghana cedis. Then comes the year 2020, the year of elections. Half-year tax revenue obviously shows that 30 billion was paid, but this was certainly not enough to pay for both compensation and debt service of 43 billion. So you collect 30 billion, but debt service and compensation was 43 billion. So clearly, you will have to borrow to top up before you can pay your staff, like teachers and nurses, and before you can service your debt. And you could see that this is the situation that we are in. But let me say that this is largely because of the huge debt service obligation as a result of reckless borrowing. It should be noted that out of the 30 billion tax revenue, 10 billion Ghana cedis is already earmarked for statutory funds such as the constitutional DACF, this Assembly Common Fund, National Health Insurance Levy, Get Fund, Road Fund, and others. And it obviously means that they did not pay for it. And I've tried to show this graph. And what this chart shows is that for the first one, you can see the one in orange representing your revenue. And then two items in yellow representing your wages and salary of government workers, and obviously the fact that you have to service your debt. So you have 30 billion against 43 billion. How do you do it? You have to borrow more to pay your debt. So even the debt itself, you have to borrow money before you can service it. But remember that this 30 billion has 10 billion Ghana cedis for statutory funds. One of them is constitutional, District Assembly Common Fund. The others are legal, and you have to pay them, and the money is not obviously available. So if you are to be judicious with what the laws require, you have to put 10 billion aside. And putting 10 billion aside will mean that the only tax revenue that is available for the nation is 20 billion Ghana cedis. So out of the 20 billion Ghana cedis, you had to borrow additional 23.1 billion Ghana cedis before you can service your debt and before you can pay your wages and salaries. In fact, in simple put, the 20 billion is not enough to service your debt. So you have to borrow more to service your debt. So no wonder today as we speak, District Assembly releases are not going, Get Fund is not being paid, National Health Insurance is dying, and everyone else is dying because the money is simply not available. Colleagues, Ghana has indeed inevitably reached a point where the interest of the creditor and the public has collided, and this is important. Creditors, including treasury bill holders, bond holders, term loan holders, government contractors, and etc., definitely want to be repaid according to the terms of their finance agreement or contract. On the other hand, the public, you and I, want pensions to be paid, health care to be provided, roads to be maintained, children to be educated. But the truth is, Ghana cannot currently afford to repay its debt obligation according to the finance agreement and provide public goods at the same time. That is the stark reality. Ghana is simply insolvent. In other words, bankrupt. That is the sad reality. But it's also important for us to understand and to diagnose the problem as it is. The problem we face now has to do with insolvency. It has nothing to do with liquidity. And we should understand that we have an insolvency situation at hand, and there's the need for us to confront it head on. And to our senior citizens here, you recall that under Achampon, we had to contend with Yentua. Today, we have seen Achampon reincarnate form called Yentumintua. That is where we are. So you have Achampon under and Achampon, there is Yentua, and we are going to have under President Akufo-Addo Yentumintua. That's the worst form of Achampon regime. But this is possible. A clear-cut distinction between insolvency and liquidity, Yentua and Yentumintua, is possible, since borrowing cost and market access depends on the word insolvency. Ghana is currently suffering from what I call sovereign insolvency stress, SIS, which means that we are facing the following: loss of market access, high and rising borrowing costs, rapid depreciation of the Ghanaian cedi, high inflation, default staring at Ghana, and there's low fiscal space. Our debt situation has been unsustainable since 2021. Ghana is currently insolvent or bankrupt and cannot repay its debt. The situation is not, and I repeat, not liquidity. But you see, when you, as I said, you are confronted with a default staring at you, oftentimes people take this lightly. But we cannot take this lightly. You will need to understand the kind of default that you will have to contend with, whether yentua or yentumintua. The two are not the same. One is liquidity and one has to do with insolvency. But let me say, and each one has different medicines. So you cannot use medicine A to treat ailment B. It should go according to plan. First, if the default has to do with soft default, in other words, liquidity, or yentua and a champon, it's something that creditors are quite friendly with. But when the default situation that you have to contend with has to do with insolvency, in other words, the kind of default that creditors are unfriendly with, yentumintua, where we are now, then you will have to look at it and understand and take the right medication. First of all, if a country has an ability to pay, but obviously facing short-term financing needs, and the fact that because they are facing short-term financing needs, there's no willingness to pay, that country is facing liquidity problems. If the debt is due today, they come to you and inform you that because of problem A and B, I cannot pay the debt today, so I will pay next year. And then the second point is they do what we call coupon reduction. Coupon simple means interest rate. So they come to you and say to you that the interest rate of 15%, I can't pay because of the problem that I'm in. So I will want you to accept, say, 5%. What this simple means is that, and if you track country to country, those who have gone through this, it means that the investor will lose approximately 20% of his or her investment. 20%. But that is not what we are in. Our situation is far worse. Yentua. And as I said, our situation is yentumintua. And if you have to contend with yentumintua, hard default, the first thing you need to understand is the level of your debt. We all know, and you can see there, we all know that our debt situation is such that we will have to look at the debt levels. The debt levels, as we are talking about today, everyone has confirmed that Ghana's debt is unsustainable. In fact, our debt is highly unsustainable and is in debt distress. This means that we have lost the ability to pay. And as I did the ability to pay analysis, and you saw it clearly, that Ghana does not have the ability to pay, then it means you have solvency problem. What countries have done over the years is that when you are confronted with a situation like that of insolvency problem, there's something we call principal haircut. And that is why I said get ready for a crude and painful haircut. The principal haircut means that the value of your bond itself, government will call you and tell you that you're into mintua. And so you have to accept a haircut, a baba, to shave you off. Even if you have no hair, like I don't have, you are going to get it. What this means is that, and if you look at country to country, an average NPV loss to the investor will be about 60%. 60% of loss is going to be you have to contend with. But there are some good news and the bad news. There are typically 5 ways to deal with unsustainable debt situation. And every country has to go through this if you are confronted with unsustainable debt. You either grow out of the debt, which this administration unfortunately had not been able to do. They inherited a lot of real sector investment that brought about a lot of %. But is that possible in the case of Ghana? Ghana cannot do that. So we have only two options left. Repay it through fiscal adjustment and restructure it. So I will spend my time on this last two and conclude. How do we repay fiscal adjustment? Colleagues and ladies and gentlemen, Ghana's rising debt burden confront our government with difficult choices, especially as our debt distress trend is upwards. The government will have to deliver 8% of GDP in primary surpluses 4 consecutive years to lower the debt to GDP from 100% to 70% if government decide to repay its debt through fiscal adjustment. This will mean that a fiscal adjustment of about 8% of GDP, and simple put, we'll have to increase taxes, say 4% of GDP, and cut expenditure of about 4% of GDP. But I doubt that at this critical time of our national life, hardships at this unprecedented levels, worst form of hardship in our lifetime, whether we can increase additional taxes. I doubt. Expenditure cut of 4% of GDP, yes, there is room. And I'm sure in the course of it, we can discuss that. Additional taxes, in my view, will be too painful. It will increase the suffering of the people of Ghana, and Ghana government cannot accept this. I think that this is not an option. These measures may be punitive and may lead to socio-political instability, obviously because the current economic hardship is just too much. If the government had listened to us in the year 2021, when my good self, the Honorable Haruna, the Honorable Muntaka, and our colleagues came here in UPSA and had the opportunity to invite the minister responsible for finance and to inform them that Ghana's debt has reached an unsustainable limit, so they should start the digging. The government decided to ignore us. In fact, Ghana could have remedied the situation, but unfortunately, they refused to act. Now the fiscal crisis has escalated. Ladies and gentlemen, let me say that there is a way to deal with this. At the time that we had informed them, clearly our debt levels was 80%. All what they should have done was to do a primary surplus of 2.7% of GDP. If they had done primary surplus of 2.7% of GDP, and this was easy to do, if you constrain the president lifestyle alone and cut the office of government machinery budget alone, you could have done that. But unfortunately, they decided to go on overdrive, on expenditure. Overdrive, high speed, Formula 1. And that has landed us to this level. Today, our debt has moved from 80% of GDP in 2021 January to approximately 100%. The World Bank has said that you will need it's about approximately 105% of GDP. But as patriotic as I am, I've always said it's 100%. And 100% will mean that to bring it down to 70%, you will need to do 8% of primary surplus every year for 4 years. So colleagues, Ghana should brace for serious austerity in the coming years for the next 4 years or more. The mess they have created is such that they will leave office and their shadow will follow any government that comes after them. Has started talking about debt restructuring, obviously as a tool to deal with the unsustainable debt levels. And this will be my last topic to discuss, then I will sit. Debt restructuring, simple means Ghana cannot meet its debt service obligation. In other words, it has to renegotiate its debt terms, repayment terms. The announcement of debt restructuring will mean that Ghana has defaulted in its debt service obligation and will have to renegotiate its debt. International credit rating agencies are most likely to downgrade Ghana to D in the coming months, as soon as the government officially announces debt restructuring. The process of debt restructuring is similar to HIPIC. However, HIPIC targeted bilateral and multilateral loans. Loans that you owe to country, and multilateral to international banks like World Bank, IMF, Africa Development Bank, Asia Development Banks. But debt restructuring will target commercial debt, debt that is owned to private individuals and private banks, and state banks that are privately owned. Examples of commercial lenders and possible debt restructuring envelope may include. So the following are the people that should expect a haircut. Domestic bond holders, get ready. Foreign bond holders, get ready. Term loans from local banks, get ready. Term loans from foreign banks, ready. ESLA bond holders, get ready. Get Fandache bond holders, get ready. Cocoa Bills bond holders, get ready. Bilateral loans will be affected. Export credit loans will be affected. Government contractors and suppliers, including IPPs, will also be affected. So this is where we are. Commercial lenders and others will have to accept a reduction in interest and principal payment, or risk default or non-payment. So the question is, you accept the haircut no matter how bad it is. It doesn't matter whether you get ugly, because obviously if you don't accept it, then there will be non-payment. So I would prefer to be ugly than not to get my money at all, because I will starve to die. But it's important for us to draw some distinctions between domestic and external debt restructuring. And I have said that one of the biggest dilemmas in sovereign debt restructuring is the extent to which the burden should be borne by holders of the debt instrument, governed by domestic and foreign laws. And that is what we call domestic and foreign debt restructuring. Restructuring domestic debt is like a surgery. You only do it if you must, and you avoid it if it might do more harm than good. It's a dangerous tool. Restructuring the local debt must be thought through very well. Imagine the consequences of haircut. Government bond has suddenly become 700,000 Ghana cedis, to the extent that government has taken 300 million of your money. Imagine that. Imagine waking up one early morning only to be told that your 25% interest on your investment is suddenly going to become 15%. At a time inflation is almost 40%. Simple put, you are going to get real interest rate on your returns. Terrible times. Imagine an individual losing so much of his lifetime savings that has been invested in government bonds and the so-called risk-free. Imagine. Pension funds will suffer in a drop in value. Tier 2 and Tier 3 pension payout will drop from already low levels. Tier 1, SNET, reserves will drop in value. SNET capacity to pay pensions will certainly suffer. Insurance companies' reserves will fall, with implication for benefit payment, unfortunately. Local banks, other deposit-taking institutions, savings and loans, rural banks, credit unions, mind the health of the banking system, since capital adequacy will depend on the colleagues. The burden will be mostly borne by banks. The ones that will suffer most after banks will be firms and companies. Individuals will also suffer. Foreign investors, rural banks, I don't know who they are, they will also suffer. State pensions will also suffer. So to the MC, Obi, it is not only drivers that are suffering, everybody will suffer under this economy. We estimate that Ghana will require a debt relief of about 45% of GDP, in excess of 200 billion Ghana cedis, to make our debt sustainable. Simply put, Ghana will have to ask you and I, Sami, to give free money to the government of 200 billion Ghana cedis before our debt will become unsustainable. To make our debt sustainable, we need to reduce our debt to GDP from over 100% to 55% of GDP. And this is required before we can get an IMF board approval, not staff level. So even if you get staff level approval, until you make your debt sustainable by doing all what it takes to to get debt relief of 200 billion Ghana cedis and to bring it to 55% of GDP, the board will not sit and you will not get a dime from the IMF. And I repeat, you will not get a dime from the IMF. There are obviously consequences to debt restructuring. Ghana will be the first sub-Saharan African country to restructure its commercial debt with a huge reputational damage. And Nkrumah's Ghana is now going to suffer reputational damage, the Black Star of Africa. Within 20 years, Ghana is moving from heavily indebted poor country, HIPIC, to sovereign insolvency stress. So the problem now is no longer HIPIC. We are in SIS, sovereign insolvency stress. Economic growth will be the biggest casualty in the next 3 years. Now I'll move to recommendation and conclude. Colleagues, the future of our dear country is at stake, and there is the need to not to leave our future and livelihood only to the ruling government. We all have to get involved. We have that sacred responsibility to the people of Ghana. We cannot sit unconcerned and wait for IMF to save our dear country from collapse. The economic trend, we demand urgent consideration. This country belongs to all of us. Number one, curbing inflation should be the top priority. Ghana does not want inflation to be entrenched. We need to confront inflation now before it becomes too late. Number two, the Bank of Ghana need to anchor inflation expectation. Immediately, they should stop the printing of currency, otherwise known as monetary financing to finance government expenditure. That should stop immediately after this. But somebody is in charge. Today, it looks as if nobody is in charge. Forget about what they are doing, meeting forex bureaus and black market people. Go and do the heavy duty. That is what the investors are looking at. Government must prioritize and rationalize expenditure by cutting all unnecessary and frivolous expenditures. Imposing taxes at this time will hurt Ghanaians and undermine economic growth and economic recovery that we all seek. However, there is an urgent need to improve compliance in tax collection. I now conclude. The haircut will hit you directly or indirectly. It doesn't matter if you have no hair. It will be crude and painful, extremely painful. Don't celebrate if you are bald-headed like me. The crude haircut will still find you and punish you. Mr. President, please be aware that a Mickey Mouse form of debt restructuring will hurt Ghana big time. Your debt restructuring must not target domestic creditors. It will destroy us. Ghana is in a deep mess because the managers of the economy failed to act. For them, everything is about the next election. They never accept responsibility. They always say, it wasn't me. It was the guy behind the tree. They live in another planet. They do not appreciate what the IMF will require from them, let alone to start the digging. The ineptitude is just unbelievable. The Ghanaian economy is indeed suffering from sovereign insolvency stress and stagflation coupled with acute debt overhang. If the economic hardship and the haircut find you, remember, it is as a result of the ineptitude